Dear learners, I am Christina Georgy, your academic counselor, and I welcome each and every one of you to my session. Today we will deal with Kate Chopin's Awakening. So dear learners, let me remind you that this is a specialized session based on the course code BEGE144. If you are a student of BEG, you might be studying this particular content under the course title BEGC134. So this particular lecture will be useful for both students of BEGE144 and BEGC134 respectively. I suppose I made it clear to you. As per the request of many of our learners, this particular session will be recorded by me, and yet another learner request was to make this a bilingual session. We have many learners attending this, so this will be a bilingual session. There will be occasional instances of Malayalam explanation, the regional language explanation as well. So shall we proceed to Kate Chopin's Awakening? It would be great if you could respond occasionally with the use of the chat box. That will help you communicate better with me. Yes, thank you, thank you. You can ask me if there is anything you are not sure about so that I can explain. Alright? Yes. So before we move on to this particular topic as such, let me give you an overview regarding this particular course. So you have blocks and units with respect to this particular course. So always remember the course code and the course title. So the course code for the BEGH students is BEGE144 and the course title is Reading the Novel. If you are a student of BEG, then your course code will be BEGC134. The title is quite the same, Reading the Novel. So your study material, I am referring to the IGNOU official study material, and it is divided into blocks and units, the same way as you did for all your previous TEEs as well. So this particular study material is divided into 4 blocks. So if you have a detailed look at the 4 blocks, you can see that the very first block is an introduction. It is an introduction to the literary genre that we are focusing our attention towards. So which is the particular literary genre that we are focusing our attention towards? Is it poetry, drama, or prose? What do you mean by the term literary genre? I just named the 3 prominent literary genres in English. What is the title of this particular course? There itself you know what. Yes, exactly, novel. So in the introductory session, that is basically block 1, we discuss the aspects of the novel, and to a great extent we provide an introduction to the novel. So we have already discussed these aspects. If you haven't been part of these studies, you may refer to the playlist on this particular course. I'll also share the links with you. So now let's focus our attention towards block 2. So from block 2, we'll deal with the detailed study of the novels that are prescribed for your study. Any idea regarding the novels? One among them is Kate Chopin's Awakening, we know. What about the third and second novel prescribed? Any idea? You have a novel titled Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. There is one more novel titled Paraja. Paraja is written by Gopinath Mohanty. So we will discuss in detail all the 3 novels in our upcoming sessions. Today our focus will solely be on Kate Chopin's Awakening. So remember, always make a clear-cut idea regarding the correct title. For ease, I just mentioned Keith Chopin's Awakening, but the real title is The Awakening. Keith Chopin's The Awakening. So who is Keith Chopin? If you are not very familiar regarding this author and the work, you must be wondering what is ma'am saying, what is Keith Chopin's Awakening? So Keith Chopin is an author, and The Awakening is the particular work written by this author. Is that clear? This particular block, that is block 2, is also divided into units. Alright. So if you look at your study material, just give me a minute, I'll explain the unit division. The first unit you have to study is titled Locating the Awakening, that is background and context regarding this particular work. The second unit is titled Contextualizing Keith Chopin's The Awakening, and the next unit, that is unit 3, is titled Critical Responses to the Awakening, and finally the last unit, unit 4, is titled Critical Approaches to the Awakening. So there is certainly a difference, a notable difference between responses and approaches with respect to the critical perspective. We will discuss all such aspects when we deal with these units in detail. So before we move on to these units as such, so I being an academic counselor would try to give you an unit wise overview regarding this particular novel, because I believe there will be a sure question, an essay question from this particular block. So I'll try my level best to explain everything so as to facilitate your learning. Before moving on to the units as such, I'd like to give you an overview, or rather an introduction regarding this particular author and the work, Keith Chopin. So do you think this person is a male author or a female author? Just try to guess, a wild guess. Okay, what about the others? Keith Chopin. People are right. She is a female author. Keith Chopin was an American author who focused her attention towards short stories and novels. To understand her in detail, we can say that she has been, or she is considered as a forerunner of American 20th century feminist authors of Catholic background. Let me explain this in Malayalam also. ഈ Keith Chopin ഒരു അമേരിക്കൻ ഓതറാണ്. അവർ ആദ്യകാലത്തെ ഒരു ഫെമിനിസ്റ്റ് റൈറ്ററായിട്ട് അറിയപ്പെടുന്നത്. ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻറ്റ് പോയിന്റ് ആണ്. മേക്ക് ഷുവർ ദാറ്റ് യു റൈറ്റ് ദിസ് ആസ്പെക്ട് വെൻ എവർ യു ആർ അറ്റൻഡിങ് എ ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ ബേസ്ഡ് ഓൺ Keith Chopin's The Awakening. Alright. So she is best known today for her work written in the year 1899. And you can certainly guess the name of the work. Obviously, The Awakening. So this has turned out over the centuries to be one of the seminal works written by Keith Chopin. Now comes the importance of the title, The Awakening. No, I am not using the PDF, so I can't share the screen. If you haven't received your study material, what you can do is you can refer to our official website. IGNOU's study materials are provided through BEGE144. It is our website, our official website. So what you can do is you can just type BEGE144 and the course code. BEGYANKOSH and the course code. Yes, there you will get the PDF of the study material. Yes. Where were we? Yes, we were referring to the title of the work. So any idea regarding this particular word, awakening? When you hear this word, what comes to your mind? Awakening. In Malayalam we say ഒരു ഉണർവെന്നൊക്കെ പറയത്തില്ലേ, ഒരു പുത്തൻ ഉണർവുണ്ടാവുക, അതാണ് ഈ awakening. It can be considered as if a sudden realization. Awakening, the word refers to an act or movement of becoming suddenly aware of something. When you tend to be aware of something all on a sudden, It can be considered as an awakening. So it could be a political awakening or religious awakening, or in this particular work it is the sexual awakening that has been connoted. So we'll discuss the summary of this novel for your better understanding. Before that, I'd like to introduce you to the main character of this particular novel. So let me ask you a question. There is a specific term that denotes the central character of a particular work in literature, and this word starts with the alphabet P. Any idea? Yes, correct. In my last sessions, especially during the second year, I mentioned this in class, right? When we were studying American literature. I'm glad that you people remember. Yes. So, the protagonist, this is a term that denotes the central character of any work of art, may that be a prose, a poem, or a drama. Alright. So, here also we have a central character, and the central character, the protagonist of this particular novel is named Edna. E-D-N-A, Edna Pontellier. So that is the name of the central character. Make sure that you are aware of the correct spelling. Whenever you write this name for your TEE, make sure that you write the correct spelling. So who is Edna? She is a 28-year-old woman. She is nearing her 30s. She belongs to the late 20s, we can say. So she is a Creole woman living in New Orleans. So remember, Kate Chopin is an American author. So this novel would certainly have the context of, or rather it will be based on the American background, right? Yes. So remember, it is said that she is a Creole woman. So what do you mean by Creole? Some of you must have heard this term. A Creole person is basically someone of mixed race, that is European and black descent. So they are seen especially in the Caribbean. So here, with respect to this particular novel, the Creole aspect is described at a later point of time in this particular unit. If you could look at section 4.5 of this particular unit, that is the very first. Okay, this is not the first unit. So this will be unit 2 of your study material. We'll discuss that. Alright. So let me make this clear. In order to facilitate easy understanding, I'll be dealing with unit 2 first. We'll start off with contextualizing Kate Chopin's The Awakening and later proceed to unit 1, that is locating the awakening. Because I believe once we go through this particular unit, which is unit 2, it will be more easy for you to comprehend, the content of unit 1. I find this more sequential in structure. So that is why, unless you know the summary or unless you know what's happening in the novel, which is actually explained in unit 2, you won't be able to understand, the aspects mentioned in unit 1. Ideally, you people are expected to have read the text. That is why our study material is prepared in this manner. So our study material intends to facilitate your study, right? So basically, you people are expected to have read the novel, then this particular ordering would do. That is, unit 1, 2, 3 and 4 would be wonderful. So I understand that none of you have read the text. So in that scenario, we will start off with unit 2. Is that clear? എല്ലാവർക്കും മനസ്സിലായോ? അതായത് നിങ്ങളുടെ ടെക്സ്റ്റിലെ യൂണിറ്റ് 2 ആണ് നമ്മൾ ആദ്യം പറയുന്നത്. എന്നാലേ അതിനൊരു കറക്റ്റ് ഓർഡർ വരുന്നതായിട്ട് എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നുള്ളൂ. കാരണം അതിൻ്റെ അകത്താണ് കഥയും കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ വരുന്നത്. അത് മനസ്സിലാക്കാതെ അങ്ങോട്ട് പോയിട്ട് കാര്യമില്ലല്ലോ. എല്ലാവരും റെസ്പോണ്ട് ചെയ്യണേ, എന്നാലേ നമുക്ക് ഒരു ഇതുള്ളൂ, മനസ്സിലാവുന്നുണ്ടോ എന്ന് അറിയണമല്ലോ. യെസ്. So, I'll give you an overview regarding this particular story. That is, this story is about Edna's awakening. What kind of awakening? Awakening to sexual consciousness. It is basically her discovery and assertion of the new self. And how is that acquired? Through rebellion against conventional roles. Which are the conventional roles? Roles of being a wife and a mother. So, we understand that Edna is more or less locked in a typical marriage. A marriage of convenience where no aspect of romance is involved, and she has been living a life where it has been stuck into the conventional roles of being wife and mother, and she had no sexual or monetary or any other kind of independence. So this particular novel is about self-expression and a woman's right to be herself and to be an individual. So who's the woman in point? Yes, the protagonist of the novel, Edna. Yes, correct. So I'll explain the story. Later I'll also explain in Malayalam. Okay. So listen to the English explanation. I am very sure that you will follow it. But for clarity I'll also explain in Malayalam. So now we know that Edna is married and her husband's name is Leonce Pontelier. Okay. He's a good man basically. He's also a caring husband. But the issue is that Edna is more or less romantic in nature. Remember, she is 28-year old and she is a young lady. She has 2 sons, and her romantic urgings and physical longings have hardly been articulated, and she was not certainly satisfied for that matter. So once the family goes, whose family? Edna's family, they go to Grand Isle for the summer. It's basically a vacation, family vacation, and there she meets someone. Okay, he was a young person. His name is Robert Libran. So he was actually a young bachelor, and they both spent time together. They involved in activities such as swimming, talking, and they spend a lot of time together. So naturally love blossomed. Remember, it is not the 21st century. The novel was set during the 1800s. So remember the conservative society and the patriarchal conventions, and our protagonist, our heroine, is married also. But right now she has developed feelings for yet another guy who is not her husband. Alright. So they both, Edna and Robert, begin to feel an attraction for each other. But soon or less, Robert realizes the impossibility of the situation. What kind of impossibility? Like I said, she is already married and it is not conventionally possible for them to be together. Are you following me? What about the others? Yes, good. So, Robert was quite confused about the situation. He didn't know how to deal with it. So, what actually happened is that he flees to Mexico. That is, in order to make money, he didn't know how to deal with the situation. So, he abandoned Edna and he disappeared. So, once he is gone, who has gone? Robert. Once he is gone, Edna got struck with the truth, and later her family returned to the home, okay, their normal home in the city. But what happens is that things can never be the same for Edna. That is, Edna more or less became a changed person. Why did that happen so? It happened because as a result of her encounter with Robert. And we can say that there happened a transition, a transformation. A transformation in whom? In Edna. She was being just a normal mother and a wife, but now she has acquired some kind of an awakening, and she more or less began to aspire for freedom. So the new Edna, that is the awakened Edna, has become a painter. So right now she doesn't care about her responsibilities of being a mother or a wife, and she didn't care about keeping up with the appearances or with the customs, and she even refuses to stay home on Tuesdays to receive her callers. And gradually what happened is that her husband complains about her lack of supervision to the servants and her bad cooking and aspects like that. So day by day she became careless and disinterested with regard to domestic affairs, and her family has become more or less meaningless and distant. This is because of her desire to fearlessly possess her identity and being her own, and that become her primary focus, and she wants to feel a sense of being financially independent and not answerable to anybody. She even refuses to go to her sister's wedding and has no thoughts about property or what the world will say about her behavior. But Mr. Pontellier worries. Who is he? He is her husband. So he worries about Edna's health and her strange behavior, not strange behavior, because at those times a woman was not expected to behave in such ways, right? Yes. So it refers to the patriarchal conventions and the traditions of the then times. We'll discuss these aspects in detail when we look at the biographical details of Kate Chopin as well. And thereafter what happens is that Mr. Pontellier, the husband, leaves town, and gradually this grandmother takes the children away, and Edna, is left alone. And Edna has been constantly visited by Mademoiselle Reiss. She is a pianist of exceptional talent but of a strange character, and it is to her that Robert writes and inquires regarding Edna. It is difficult to cut short the entire novel into a few minutes of narration. I'll be explaining the major events, alright. Nevertheless, you'll have to go refer to at least the major happenings of the novel. It is given in this particular unit. In unit 2 of your study material, it's all given. So what happens is that at a later point of time, Edna needed a place of her own, and as a result she wanted to be independent, and she more or less moved on to a separate house. So it is called the Pigeon House, and she even throws a party to her friends when she was moving. And this husband was obviously disappointed with the acts of this lady, and somewhere inside her, Edna keeps waiting for Robert. Who's Robert? Her crush, or we can say the lover that she had. And one day she waits for Madam in her home, the friend that we mentioned, and surprisingly Robert comes in, and they meet. Okay, the union happens. But will that be a successful union? Let's check it out. So Edna is disappointed and heartbroken that such an accidental meeting should have occurred between them, where everything turns out to be happy and happily ever after. But what happens is that they spend time together, and she forces him to articulate his real feelings towards her. So we can say maybe he was about to confess. He tries his best to stay away from her as from temptation, stating clearly enough that being a married woman, she was not free to belong to him. But as soon as they confess their love for each other, Edna was called away by her friend Adele. So it was in order to assist her during childbirth. So once she returns, she'll just sees a note written by Robert, and this note says, "Goodbye because I love you. Goodbye because I love you." Alright, So towards the end of the novel, what we see is that Edna is left in deep thought and she goes back to Grand Isle, the place where she met Robert, the location of her first awakening, and she walks away into the waves of the sea, naked and alone, in search of a final home. So more or less we can say that she drowned herself in the sea in order to free herself from the clutches of the social conventions, patriarchy and other customs and traditions. So with that, this particular novel comes to an end. So this is the brief summary of the novel that we will be focusing our attention towards, The Awakening by Kate Chopin. So did you understand my narration? What about the rest of you? If in case you were not able to follow, it's primarily because you are listening this for the first time. Ideally, you are expected to come prepared at least with the summary of the novel we are studying. No problem, this is the first class, I understand. So what you should do is, when you have time, you should go to this particular unit, which is unit 2 of your study material. There they have explained everything in detail. So it is my obligation to explain things in the regional language also. So I will take 2 minutes to explain the same thing in Malayalam so that everybody feels confident about knowing the details of this novel. So this novel നമ്മൾ പരീക്ഷയ്ക്ക് എഴുതുമ്പോൾ എഴുതേണ്ട ചില പ്രത്യേക കാര്യങ്ങൾ, ഒന്ന് ഇതിൻ്റെ പ്രോട്ടഗോണിസ്റ്റ് എന്ന് പറയുന്ന എഡ്ന പൊണ്ടിലിയർ, സ്പെല്ലിംഗ് പഠിക്കണം. സോ പുള്ളിക്കാരി ഒരു നോർമൽ ഹൗസ് വൈഫ്, ഒരു മദറായിട്ട് ജീവിക്കുമായിരുന്നു. ഒരു ദിവസം ഇവരൊരു ഫാമിലി ട്രിപ്പ് പോവും ഗ്രേറ്റ് ഐൽ എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ഒരു സ്ഥലത്തോട്ട്. അവിടെ വെച്ചൊരു യങ് മാനുമായിട്ട് ഇവർക്കൊരു അട്രാക്ഷൻ ഉണ്ടാവുകയും അവരൊരു ലവ് ബ്ലോസം ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു സിറ്റുവേഷനിൽ ഇരിക്കുകയും അപ്പം അദ്ദേഹം അറിയും ഇവർ മാരീഡ് ആണ്. അപ്പോൾ പുള്ളി ബേസിക്കലി പേടിച്ചോടും. അങ്ങനെ ഇവരെ അങ്ങ് അബാൻഡൻ ചെയ്യും. അപ്പോൾ പക്ഷേ ഇവരിപ്പോഴും അവരുടെ ഒരു ലോകത്താണ്. പക്ഷേ അത് ആ ഒരു സംഭവം ഇവരിലൊരു തിരിച്ചറിവ് ഉണ്ടാക്കുകയാണ്. അവർക്കൊരു സെക്ഷൽ ഫ്രീഡം വേണം, അവർക്കൊരു ഇൻഡിപെൻഡൻസ് വേണം. ഷീ ഈസ് നോട്ട് ജസ്റ്റ് എ മദർ ആൻഡ് എ വൈഫ്, ഷീ നീഡ്സ് മച്ച് മോർ ഇൻ ലൈഫ് എന്നുള്ള ഒരു റെക്കഗ്നിഷൻ, ഒരു റിയലൈസേഷൻ ഉണ്ടാവുകയാണ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. അത് കഴിഞ്ഞ് നമ്മൾ കാണുന്ന എഡ്ന എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ഒരു ടോട്ടലി ഡിഫറെൻ്റ് ഒരു പേഴ്സണാലിറ്റിയാണ് കാണുന്നത്. അവർ പെയിൻറ്റ് ചെയ്തുകൊണ്ടൊക്കെ അവരുടെ ഒത്തിരി ടൈം സ്പെൻഡ് ചെയ്യും. ഫാമിലി ഒന്നും വലുതായിട്ട് മൈൻഡ് ചെയ്യുന്നില്ല, അവർക്ക് ഫാമിലി വലിയ ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻ്റ് ആവുന്നില്ല, മക്കളെ ഒന്നും നേരെ നോക്കുന്നില്ല. അപ്പം അത് ഗ്രാൻഡ് മദർ ആ ടേക്ക് കെയർ ചെയ്യുന്നത്, അവരുടെ കുക്കിങ്ങിലൊന്നും വലിയ ശ്രദ്ധിക്കുന്നില്ല. അവരുടെ ലൈഫ് എൻജോയ് ചെയ്യാൻ നോക്കി. ഇത്രയും കാലം എല്ലാവരെയും നോക്കി ജീവിച്ചു. ബട്ട് ഇനിയും അവരുടെ ലൈഫിന് അവരൊരു ഫോക്കസ് കൊടുത്തു തുടങ്ങി. അപ്പോൾ തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും ഹസ്ബൻഡിന് അതിൽ കുറച്ച് ഡിസപ്പോയിൻമെൻറ്റ്സ് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. നാട്ടുകാരൊക്കെ ചെറുതായിട്ട് സംസാരിച്ച് തുടങ്ങി. പക്ഷേ അതൊന്നും അവർ കെയർ പോലും ചെയ്തില്ല. പിന്നെ ഒരു മാഡം, ഒരു പുള്ളിക്കാരിയുടെ പേര് പറയുന്നുണ്ട്, അവരൊരു ഫ്രണ്ടാണ് പിൽക്കാലത്ത്. ആൻഡ് ഒരു പ്രാവശ്യം അവരുടെ വീട്ടിലിരിക്കുമ്പം അവരുമായിട്ട് ഈ റോബർട്ട് കമ്മ്യൂണിക്കേറ്റ് ചെയ്യുമായിരുന്നു. ആൻഡ് ഹി യൂസ് ടു എൻക്വയർ വെദർ എഡ്ന ഈസ് ഫൈൻ, ഹൗ ഷീ ഡൂയിങ് ആൻഡ് തിങ്സ് ലൈക്ക് ദാറ്റ്. അപ്പം അങ്ങനത്തെ കമ്മ്യൂണിക്കേഷൻ്റെ കാര്യം അവർ എഡ്നയോട് പറയുകയും ചെയ്യുമായിരുന്നു കേട്ടോ. അപ്പോൾ ഒരു ദിവസം അങ്ങനെ അവരുടെ വീട്ടിലിരുന്നപ്പോൾ ഈ റോബോട്ട് വരികയും അപ്പം ഇവളാണെങ്കിൽ ഫോഴ്സ് ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട് കൺഫസ് ചെയ്യാനൊക്കെ. അപ്പം അങ്ങനെ അത് നടക്കും, കൺഫെഷൻ ഉണ്ടാകുമെന്നൊരു സിറ്റുവേഷൻ. when they were about to confess, what happens is that another friend of Edna അവരുടെ ഒരു ചൈൽഡ് ബർത്തിന് അസിസ്റ്റ് ചെയ്യാനായിട്ട് എഡ്നെ വിളിക്കുകയും അത് കഴിഞ്ഞ് എഡ്ന തിരിച്ചു വരുമ്പോൾ കാണുന്നത് ഗുഡ് ബൈ ബിക്കോസ് ഐ ലവ് യു എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ഒരു യെസ് ആ പേരാണ് കേട്ടോ. അങ്ങനെ ഒരു നോട്ടുമാണ് കാണുന്നത്. അപ്പോൾ അതവർക്ക് വലിയ സങ്കടം ഉണ്ടാവുകയാണ്. ആൻഡ് പിന്നെ അവർ ഒരു അവേക്കനിങ്, അവർ കുറച്ചുകൂടെ ഒരു ഫ്രീഡത്തിന് വേണ്ടി ക്രേവ് ചെയ്യുകയും അതിനു വേണ്ടി പ്രയത്നിക്കുകയും അപ്പോഴത്തേനും അവരുടെ ഫാമിലി ലൈഫൊക്കെ ഫുൾ ഡിസ്ട്രപ്റ്റ് ആയി പോയിരുന്നു. പിന്നെ അവസാനം നമ്മൾ കാണുന്നത് അവരൊരു പ്രത്യേക മാനസികാവസ്ഥയിൽ അവരൊരു ഡ്രൗൺ ചെയ്യുന്ന, അവർ പറയുന്നത് ഒരു കുറച്ച് മെറ്റഫറിക്കലി ഫ്രീഡം തേടി അവർ സീയിലേക്ക് പോയി എന്നാണ്. ദാറ്റ് ടു നേക്കഡ്. അന്നത്തെ കാലത്ത് അതൊക്കെ ഭയങ്കര റെവല്യൂഷണറി ആക്റ്റാണ് കേട്ടോ. നേക്കഡ് ആയിരുന്നു, എലോൺ ആയിരുന്നു, അവർ സീയിൽ പോയി. ടു ബി വെരി ഫ്രാങ്ക്, ഷീ ഡൈഡ്, ബട്ട് ഇറ്റ് ഇസ് സെഡ് ദാറ്റ് ഷീ വാസ് ക്രേവിംഗ് ഫോർ sexual, financial and other kinds of independence with respect to the restrictions that were imposed to the women of the era. So is that clear? Yes. Okay, എല്ലാവർക്കും മനസ്സിലായെന്നാണ് ഞാൻ വിചാരിക്കുന്നത്. Okay. Now let's move on to section 4.3 which deals with the biographical approach to the awakening. What do you mean by the term biography? Suppose I am writing a book about myself, say the life and times of Christina Georgy. Then you can say I wrote an autobiography. Why is that called autobiography? It's because I wrote about myself, my own story. So that is an autobiography. So what do you mean by a biography? Yes, autobiography is own life story. Very much correct. My question is, what do you mean by biography? It's basically writing about somebody's life. Yes, life story written by others. Yes, when somebody else writes about you, all your answers are correct. I appreciate it. So right now we will deal with the biographical approach to this particular novel. So the biographical approach to reading a novel is when we read about the writer's own life in order to know his or her personal story, so that we get some clues and insights into understanding the novel better. Yes, that is also a significant aspect. If we know the personal details of Kate Chopin, it would be much more easier for us to contextualize the present novel. That is, we can understand what those times were and how things happened during those era and how society was, how people used to interact with each other, the cultural, socio-political aspects, all such things will be known to us if we study the author and his or her life in detail. So let's have a look at the early life and background with respect to Kate Chopin. So she was born in the year 1850. An interesting fact is that her first name was Kate O'Flaherty. Kate Chopin was perhaps her married name, I believe. And she was married to Oscar Chopin in the year 1870. So she was hardly 20 when she was married. And he was also more or less the right man for Kate Chopin, and they shared similar values and tastes as well. One important name you should remember is that of Emily Toth. Emily Toth, who was she? She was the biographer of Kate Chopin. That is, she is the one who wrote about the life of Kate Chopin. So it is said that the portrayal of Edna Pontellier, according to the biographer, has similarities with that of her parents, who too shared no common interests or spontaneous warmth. That is, just like the couple mentioned in the novel, Edna's parents also didn't share that kind of warmth or common interests, and it could be on the basis of these people that this character could be written. And it is also noted that Kate Chopin was an emancipated woman, that is, an independent woman with habits such as drinking, smoking, walking alone, etc. So we are aware of such things in the 21st century, but remember, back then all these were unconventional in nature. Are you able to follow me? Yes, good. എന്തായാലും മനസ്സിലായില്ല ചോദിക്കണം കേട്ടോ. Okay. So all these are mentioned in your study material, and it is also said that a married man whom she encouraged pursued her, but by 1884 she returned to St. Louis to live with her mother. So when this mother, that is Kate's mother, when she died, she had to be singly responsible in bringing up her 6 children. And about her works, the very first published story titled Wiser Than a God, and it was published in 1889. It is also about a woman who becomes a great artistic success, but only after her mother's death. So this too can be considered somewhat similar with the life of Kate Chopin, right? Another important aspect to remember is that Kate Chopin was immediately successful as a writer. She had connections with writers, journalists and literary figures of the era. She was also invited to give a reading at the Wednesday Club, that is the most prestigious intellectual women's club in St. Louis. Another interesting aspect to remember is that throughout her life, she remained unconventional and emancipated. Probably that is how she mastered up the courage to write such a contradictional or such a revolutionary novel, especially with respect to those times. So she cherished her freedom and her solitude, and she decided not to marry again but to devote her life to what she loved best, that is her writing. So now let's focus our attention towards the Creole background. I already gave a mention regarding the Creole background. That is, see, the story takes place in the city of New Orleans, I told you. So this city had two distinct parts, that is one American and the other French. So Creoles are described as those descended from European ancestors, French and Spanish. And in Louisiana, those descended from French were many more. So the Creole in Louisiana would consider herself or himself to be basically of French descent. The picture of the artistic, exotic life of social gatherings and fine dining painted in the novel is clearly drawn from the life led by the Creoles in New Orleans in the 19th century. Alright. So let me explain this in Malayalam also. The Creole background in question paper കണ്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്. ഒന്നുമില്ല, അതായത് ഇവർ മാരീഡ് ആയിട്ടുള്ളത് ഒരു ക്രിയോൾ കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിയിലോട്ടാണ്. ക്രിയോൾ എന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ എന്താണെന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ രണ്ട് മിക്സസ്, രണ്ട് റേസസിൻ്റെ ഒരു മിക്സാണ്. ഓക്കെ, അതായത് ഇപ്പോൾ ഈ ന്യൂ ഓർലൻസിലാണെങ്കിൽ രണ്ട് പാർട്സ് ഉണ്ട്. ചിലത് അമേരിക്കൻ ഡിസെൻ്റ് ഉള്ളവരായിരിക്കും, ചിലർ ഫ്രഞ്ച് ഡിസെൻ്റ് ഉള്ളവരായിരിക്കും. Creoles are described as those descended from European ancestors. അത് ഫ്രഞ്ച് ആവാം, സ്പാനിഷ് ആവാം. അങ്ങനെയുള്ളൊരു മിക്സഡ് റേസിനെയാണ് ഈ ക്രിയോൾസ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് കേട്ടോ. പിന്നെ എപ്പോഴും ടെക്സ്റ്റിൽ പറയുന്നുണ്ട് ഈ എഡ്ന ശരിക്കും ഒരു ക്രിയോൾ അല്ലായിരുന്നു, അവളുടെ ഹസ്ബൻഡ് ആയിരുന്നു, അങ്ങനെ അവർ അതിലോട്ട് മാരീഡ് ആയിരുന്നു എന്നും പറയുന്നുണ്ട്. ടെക്സ്റ്റിൽ എവിടെയോ പറയുന്നുണ്ട് കേട്ടോ. ടെക്സ്റ്റിലെ ലാംഗ്വേജ് ഒക്കെ കമ്പാരിറ്റീവ്ലി സിമ്പിളാണ്, വായിച്ചാൽ മനസ്സിലാവുന്നതാണ് കേട്ടോ. ഓക്കെ, now let's focus our attention towards the biographical accounts of the life of Kate Chopin in connection with her novel The Awakening. Shall we? Yes, good. So Chopin also went to Grand Isle during summer vacations with her family. She lives in the city and in the resort on Grand Isle. This is also seen in the case of Edna in the novel also. As a widow at 32, Chopin, she was a widow by the age of 32, note that. So Chopin did not follow any kind of conventions. See, she raised her own 6 kids on her own, and it was after her mother's death that she turned to writing. All such things we know. The images of the bewitched woman in her writing are those of widows feeling joy at newfound freedom and their freedom or determination to pursue new and exciting interests. Remember, Emily Toth, who was she? She was her biographer. So Emily documents that a young widow, that is Kate Chopin, had a passionate liaison with another man, that is a married man. We also mentioned that somewhere during our discussion, and his name was Albert Samper. But she didn't marry. It was just a liaison or a relationship. As in the novel, in real life also, she leaves the lover and her life on the plantation to go and live with the mother and take care of her children. But we need to remember that the novel only has some input from her life, and that it is not autobiography. It is a work of fiction. Remember, The Awakening is not Kate Chopin's autobiography. It is just a work of fiction. Don't write as if it's an autobiography. I've seen people writing that. That's completely wrong. In this novel, we have instances from her life. We have aspects from her life, but we can never say that this is an entire work, or rather an autobiography. That is not true. We should remember that Chopin came from a traditional southern family. Her father was a religious Irishman. She was brought up by her great grandmother, who was somebody with independence. She was more like a forward thinking and unconventional personality, and it must be her influence that she has developed such courage. Yes. So let's also discuss Edna Pontellier. That is the character, the protagonist of this particular novel. So like Kate Chopin, she too seeks independence, expressing dissatisfaction with her marriage. She challenges the notion that all mothers have maternal instincts. According to her, not every mother has this maternal instinct. There is a useful description of Edna as a woman and a mother in this chapter by comparing her to another mother, that is Adele. Okay, Edna has been compared to Adele, who was more like the perfect mother, the embodiment of every womanly grace and charm. Who is that? Adele. You should remember that Edna's marriage to Mr. Pontellier lacked any kind of romantic dreaming. And Edna, as we know, is a romantic at heart, and she wanted to have, romance and such notions in her life. She has a rebellious spirit, and the objection of her family to the marriage convinces her that it is exactly what she herself wants to do. She decided to become the devoted wife of a man who worships her. Who's the man? Her own husband. That is the reference here. So later, after awakening, she transforms into a new woman. So these are the important aspects from Unit 2. Now let's move on to Unit 1, and since now we have an overview regarding the entire novel, it will be easy for us to discuss the aspects in this particular unit titled Locating the Awakening, Background and Context. So here in the introduction it is given that Kate Chopin was a really intellectual person. She was well read, and she was familiar with the works of the popular figures of the era, literary figures such as Flaubert, and she used to read such novels. And she was also inspired by stories with dark themes of suicide, infidelity, drowning, etc. What do you mean by infidelity? In Malayalam we say avishwasam, okay, such things of having extramarital affairs and things like that. Okay. She had also read the works of other modern European writers, say Ibsen and Swinburne for that matter. And she also had influences of other American writers also. They include Walt Whitman, Henry James and Nathaniel Hawthorne. Remember Nathaniel Hawthorne? Last year I told you a well-known novel by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Yes, The Scarlet Letter. Yes, it's the same person. That was also a revolutionary work. Now let's focus our attention towards the intellectual setting of The Awakening. So this was an era, the 1890s was an era of quite complexities. That is, intellectual thought was at this time being refined by the influential works of Darwin, then Spencer, Huxley, or even towards the end of the century by Sigmund Freud. Remember in 1900 the interpretations of the dream and such works came into being. The stories of a few strong women living at this time have also been documented. That is, to give you a few examples, Elizabeth Stanton published her radical The Woman's Bible in the year 1895. It would be great if you could remember that, The Woman's Bible in the year 1895. Just a work of a radical stance written by a feminist, Elizabeth Stanton. Another notable work is by yet another strong woman, that is Charlotte Gilman. She was a member of the National American Woman Suffrage Association, and it was published, she published the work Women and Economics in the year 1898. So I would advise you, or rather I would suggest you to write these two aspects somewhere in your answer sheet, because these two are significant, aspects with respect to the background to Kate Chopin's The Awakening. So the Gilman that we mentioned argued the case of women's economic independence as the foundation for better marriages, equal responsibilities, equal relationships, and more humanity for women. So she argued that if women are independent, it would be better to maintain a good marriage. Alright? Yes. So while discussing the aspects of the novel, we need to understand that Chopin is writing against such a social cultural background where Edna is one of the first women to think, express herself and act in the defiant manner. By defiant, it refers to acting in a manner which is not conventional in nature. Okay. Another mention regarding a character, Dr. Mantelet, who shows insight into Edna's sexual psychology and is progressive in his ideas of therapy, is also advanced for a time. Alright. So, remember to have an understanding regarding the characters. I am very sure that you might not be aware of all the characters. I will try to explain that aspect. That is, by now we know a few characters. We know Edna is the protagonist. What is the name of Edna's husband? If you don't remember, you can make use of your smartness and write Mr. Pontellier. That would also do. Yes, glad to see right answers. Even Mr. Pontellier would do. Okay. Another important character is the lover of Edna. What's his name? Yes, correct. I would suggest you to study the second name, because it's always conventional in literature to write the second name. If in case you forget the first name, it's fine. Second name has importance. It would be ideal for you to remember both the names anyway. So another important character is Mademoiselle Reisz. Okay. If you get time, please have a detailed reading on this particular character. As far as I understand, you don't have a detailed study on this character. As per the prescribed syllabus, the character sketch of this particular character. Nevertheless, it would be great if you could read about that, so that you can write or you can make use of that aspect in your essay answers also. Another character is Edna's close friend Adele, who represents the Victorian feminine ideal. Remember, the Victorian conventions are mentioned here. Then Dr. Mantelet, that is the character that we just spoke about. He is Edna's family physician. He is more or less an enlightened man who kind of recognizes Edna's dissatisfaction with the restrictions placed on her by social conventions. Then there are sub-characters or minor characters such as the Colonel, Victor, Madame Librum, who is actually the widowed mother of Robert Librum. Then there is this lady in black, the twins, Mrs. Highcamp, and others. Okay, when you have time, you may just refer to those characters. Nevertheless, you should know the main characters, the major characters, and you can orient your answers with respect to your detailed understanding of these main characters. Is that clear? I suppose you understood. Okay, thank you. So now we'll have a look at the critical perspectives. That is, critics have compared Kate Chopin to other American realist and naturalist writers such as Frank Norris, Stephen Crane, Theodore Dreiser, Henry James, etc. Remember, all these writers are her contemporaries. What do you mean by the term contemporaries? It refers to those writers who lived at the same time as Kate Chopin. So, if you have your textbook with you, I am referring to the official study material. This is part of section 5.2. Okay, there in bold letters they have mentioned these names. So, when we mention the character portrayal, we should specifically mention the fact that Chopin drew a heroine who was not afraid to be a sexual being. She is very honest and bold enough to articulate that extramarital sex need not be accompanied by guilt, and that a woman was perfectly justified in seeking selfhood and fulfillment outside the institutions of marriage and motherhood. So, this is an important part that you will have to be aware of with respect to your TEE perspective. It is said that Etna believes herself to be becoming more a spiritual being as she continues her journey of awakening. Both role models of womanhood mentioned in the novel, namely Adele and Mademoiselle, they are presented as alternative ways of being rejected, or rather both these people are rejected by Etna, and the reason is that she finds them inappropriate. Okay, she has been awakened and now she can't accept these two people. In short, we can conclude that Chopin's novel had the courage to embody such modernist themes. Remember, it was the Victorian era, and she had the courage to embody such modernist themes through language and style that was both explicit and deeply symbolic. And this is one aspect that makes this particular novel, The Awakening, far ahead of other literary writings published in the late 19th century. So, this writing was much ahead of the era in which it got published, and the times were not prepared to receive it, and thus it had to wait for another 70 years before it could claim its rightful place in the literary canon. Now, in this 2022, if we are studying this as part of your BA course, that shows the significance of this work, and this is one particular work that places Kate Chopin at a greater height as a literary figure in American literature. So, it is also important to understand the 19th century socio-cultural background. I already gave you an orientation. Nevertheless, our text also explains the 19th century Britain. That is, by that time, writing of fiction became very popular, and women also started reading novels, and many novels were serialized in magazines and periodicals. There started libraries in order to satisfy the growing public. Domestic middle class settings and novels based on such aspects such as marriage and morality began to be the content in the novels. There was this concept of the fallen women who had to be punished and removed from society. Fallen women is actually an archaic term used to describe a woman who has lost her innocence. That is, in the 19th century Britain, the meaning came to be closely associated with the loss of woman's chastity for that matter. But by the last years of the century, there came to emerge a picture of the new woman, and novels engaged with feminist questions such as employment for women came into vogue. Nevertheless, still, sex and relationships that would challenge established moral codes were hardly discussed, and in that context, Kate Chopin's The Awakening would have been considered too transgressive and explicit to be acceptable. We'll conclude the session with a quick mention on a few other aspects such as location and symbolism. That is, the location of the writer and her novel is the setting within which the action takes place. So the novel begins on Grand Isle, which is actually an island 50 miles south to New Orleans, then goes on later to be situated in the city of New Orleans. So about the Creoles, we already discussed. These people were descendants of French and Spanish colonists of the 18th century. They were Catholics. Strict moral religious foundation were there, and they believed in strong and conservative family values. And they also felt a close sense of community to their own cultural group. But this Louisiana remained a very conservative state, and the patriarchal family being the foundation of society, Creole women appeared to be frank, open, sensual, but always religious and completely committed to their families. So you can make use of this aspect while you prepare for your examination. Remember, Edna is herself not from a Creole background. She is married to a Creole background. I already told you this. And there is this instance in the novel where Adele notices Edna's awakening in the presence of Robert, and she warns him, asking him to keep away from her, stating clearly that, I quote, she is not one of us, I unquote. Yes, so that is also mentioned as part of section 5.4. Symbolism also plays a crucial role in the novel. Use of symbols to represent or suggest other things or ideas are seen, and yes, there are instances mentioned in the novel. And this unit concludes with a quick mention regarding Kate Chopin's oeuvre, or we can say oeuvre. Okay, so this term refers to the body of work of an author. To explain in Malayalam, ഇത് നമ്മൾ ലിറ്റററി ഔട്ട്പുട്ട് എന്നൊക്കെ പറയത്തില്ലേ, അതാണ് ഈ ഒരു വാക്കെന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. അതിൻ്റെ പ്രൊണൗൺസിയേഷനൊക്കെ ഇച്ചിരി ഡിഫറെൻ്റ് ആണ്, ബിക്കോസ് ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് എ ടേം ബോറോഡ് ഫ്രം ഫ്രഞ്ച്. That is why it has a different pronunciation. Oeuvre, that is the pronunciation. So we already discussed some aspects regarding the life and work of Kate Chopin. Since they have given a separate section as Kate Chopin's oeuvre, it would be great if you could have an understanding regarding that. I have seen this as a first short question for one of the previous TEEs. Okay. So in our last session, we'll spend some time to discuss some previous questions with respect to this particular course code. Okay, there we'll see this question. So about her literary output, she began writing for publication only in 1890. Remember that she was born in 1850. So she was in her early 40s or late 30s when she started to publish. And she was known for her local color stories. Okay, and these include typical works such as Bay of Fog, published in 1894, A Night in Arcade, published in 1897. Remember her very first novel, At Fault, published in the year 1890. It is also set in the same place as this particular novel, Louisiana. And she also has a collection of short stories, A Vocation and a Voice. That is the title, A Vocation and a Voice. So most of her stories had explicit, mention of sexuality, and as a result, one of her stories, that is The Storm, she didn't consider sending it for publication because of the explicit sexual overtones. So I explained Kate Chopin's literary output so that if there comes a question, you can write. Remember to study the very first work. Then it would be ideal if you could remember at least 2 of the local color stories by Kate Chopin. And yet another importance of this section is that when there comes an essay question, I assure you there will be an essay question from this block, from this particular novel. So for that essay question, you can make use of this aspect as if an introduction. Now comes the question, how will you attempt an essay question? See, firstly, you will have to give a brief introduction regarding the author, the life and works. The most prominent detail should be given. Thereafter, you can give a background to the work. Okay, background to the work, and then it's optional to give a 2 or 3 line explanation regarding the story. Okay, and thereafter you should move on to the critical aspects. Okay, question will come mostly based on some critical perspective. Okay, so that you can mention in the 3rd, 4th or even 5th paragraph and conclude effectively towards the end in the 6th or 7th paragraph. Ideally for 20 marks you should frame your answers effectively, write in paragraphs. Remember, it is not page numbers that matter, it is the content that matters. Nevertheless, you shouldn't write short of 4 to 5 pages. Well, then it depends on your handwriting, but then there must be content as well. Remember, you will be given answer booklets. I suppose you are aware of it. These days additional booklets are also not provided. Okay, so keep all these aspects in mind. Today, to sum up what we have discussed, we have studied the background and more or less an overview regarding the very many aspects of Kate Chopin's seminal work with feminist overtones. The work is titled The Awakening. From the TE perspective, the essay question that I expect would probably be from critical approaches to awakening, to analyze this particular text from a feminist or psychological perspective. For that matter, we need detailed understanding of what feminism is, what psychoanalysis is, and how these theories are incorporated into an analysis of this particular text. So we'll discuss all those aspects in our next session. So what we'll do is we'll take a separate session so that when you come for the session, you will have an idea regarding the story. Unless you know the idea regarding the story, you won't be able to follow the critical perspectives. Yes, thank you so much for joining me today. We'll meet again next class where we discuss the remaining units also. Thank you.